everyone. I want to introduce you to one of our own. This is Mr. Kevin Sullivan, an Iona grad from the PR grad program here at Iona College. As you saw, Kevin's resume, most impressive. So, first, right off the bat, Kevin, how do you go from North Avenue to the White House? Explain
Yeah,
that path to me, because that's mind-boggling.
I didn't see it coming. I can tell you that I was very fortunate. The way it came about was there was before Mark Cuban owned the Dallas Mavericks. Ross Perot Jr. was the owner, and he had an attorney that was part of the ownership group that advised the Perot family, who sort of saw me in action with the Mavericks, and we hit it off, and he became a mentor of mine. This was in 1996, and so in February of 2000, we moved to New York. I headed up communications at NBC Sports. Always made an effort to keep in touch with this attorney, Tom Luce. I had a great run at NBC Sports. After the merger with Universal, I had an opportunity to hop the fence to the corporate side and work in corporate communications with NBC Universal, which was a great adventure. And I kept in touch with Tom Luce. So the first lesson that I want to impart you with in answering Mike's question is, people talk about networking. I talk about relationships, and every good thing that's ever happened to me has come from a relationship that I had. And I didn't want to impress Tom Luce. I didn't stay in touch with him because I hoped that one day he would do something for me. It was just that relationship enriched my life, and he's a smart guy. And so I made an effort to stay in touch, and he did too. So one day in January of 2005, I was riding the Metro North train from our house in Valhalla, from the North White Plains, or the Valhalla station to 30 Rock, to Grand Central, to walk over to 30 Rock. And so this is January of 2005, long time ago now, but President Bush had just been elected to a second term and had just been sworn in, I think, at that time. And Tom emailed me, and again, I knew him through the Mavericks. He emailed me and said, would you be interested in a senior communications position with the administration in Washington? And I wrote back on my little BlackBerry, you mean the Wizards? Joking around. And I did not take it seriously at all. There was no way I was going to move from New York to DC, with our kids. And I was in this great job at NBC Universal. And I figured it had something to do with education, because that was his passion. And sure enough, he soon put me in touch with a woman named Margaret Spellings, who was about to be sworn in as the new Secretary of Education. And all I can tell you is that when I got that note from Tom, there are not adjectives in the English language to express how little interest I had from leaving 30 Rock to going what was then known as Federal Building Number 6. It's the smallest agency in the government. It is the least glamorous building in Washington. This was something I really could not imagine myself doing. And yet I listened, and I ended up meeting this woman, Margaret Spellings, for lunch in Washington a couple of weeks later. And she looked at me over the table in this restaurant in Alexandria, Virginia, and she said, "I don't know what you'll do after NBC, but this will be the most important thing you've done so far." And she said, "I'm putting a team together. It's going to be great. I'm only getting good people. The work is important. We don't have a lot of time. You're going to love the president. It's going to be great for your family. And I promise that anything that has anything to do with message or strategy, you will always be in the room. I won't make a move without you. What do you say?" This is before we ordered. I mean, there was no job interview. And I was aware on some level that I was being asked to serve. And I knew they weren't going to ask a guy like me more than once, because I had no background in politics or campaigns or any of that stuff. But I loved the gleam in her eye, the notion that the work was important, adventure, the Washington thing I knew would be a great adventure. But I kept saying, what am I going to tell these guys at NBC who took a chance on the sports guy? So this is a long answer, Mike, but really it was a result of my relationship with Tom Luce, connected me with Margaret Spellings, and she wanted to make a splash in the second term and hire somebody from the private sector. NBC Universal, kind of glamorous. And she just kept telling me, making that appeal, this is an opportunity to serve your country in a small way using my communications, abilities. And so over a period of time, I had to go through a background check. I remember asking her, how far back did they check? And she said, well, for the big stuff, 18. So I didn't know if I would make it through or not, but somehow I did. And then after a year at education, I got the call up to the big leagues at the White House, which is sort of another story. And maybe we can get to that before our time is up, because sports comes into play in that conversation as well. But that's how I got to Washington and ultimately the White House.
Before we get into all the professional advice you could advise, working in sports, you get to meet your childhood idols. And I remember the first time I met Reggie Jackson. I remember vividly. I remember where, and it was amazing. And I met Henry Winkler, who played the Fonz one time when I was covering a World Series. I had to pinch myself. What was it like? I'm sure you remember vividly that first day in Washington for you going into the White House.
Well, it was just, as I went in, I said a little prayer every morning as I went in through the basement door on West Exec Drive into the West Wing. And just, please God, help me not screw this up. When I worked for the Mavericks or even NBC, if I said something, there was a limited amount of damage I could do, but I was aware of the responsibility that I had working in the White House. My first day, I looked around at the first senior staff meeting at 7:30 in the morning, and I thought, man, these guys all went to Ivy League schools. I bet these men and women, I mean, they all know all this political stuff. They were on the campaign. They've been here. How am I going to fit in? And I just promised myself, and I want to encourage each of you to do the same thing. Trust your instincts, man. I just said, your skills will translate in life. And I just, I'm going to rely on my years of experience and trust my instincts and do my best. That I know I'm going to mess up at times, but I'm just going to do the best I can each day. They put me here because they wanted a new perspective. And that's kind of what I did. And I'll tell you about my first meeting. To get the job, I had 9 interviews. And I want to talk a little bit about job interviews, because you're all kind of going into that realm, I would think, soon. And I kept thinking, how do I, they told me the interview would be personal in nature. He wasn't going to tell me, he wasn't going to ask for my communications advice on comprehensive immigration reform or talking about the economy or anything like that. It was going to be a chemistry check, personal in nature is what they told me. So I thought, well, how can I make my sports background become a shared experience that we both have? And I also didn't want to come across like some sports fan guy who's in 3 fantasy leagues and listens to old, Mike DeMurgis YouTube videos all day and doesn't have anything else to offer just in this sort of sports stuff. And it actually, I thought about it long and hard, and it came to me. And so when the moment came to this, a job interview in the Oval Office is mind blowing. And I felt prepared, but I, of course, was nervous. And they brought me in there, and it's like walking into a movie set. Bright lights, you look around, it's the Oval Office. I had been there only on the tour when I went there for the job interview. So I had seen the Oval Office on the other side of the fuzzy rope, and that was it. So now I'm crossing the threshold. I shook President Bush's hand, and I said, "Sir, it's an honor to be here." And he said, "Yeah, it is. It's an honor for me too. Take a look around the Oval Office. Isn't this cool? Democracy, man. This is cool." And he immediately put me at ease. And that's what he does. And people would make fun of him, late night comics, for those kind of moments. And he never cared about that. He wanted to put me at ease, knowing how nervous I probably was. So we sit down, and I noticed that my name was on top of a briefing paper on the end table, which was also kind of mind-boggling. And he glanced at the briefing paper, and he looked at me, and he said, "I know you were at education with Margaret, and I know you worked at NBC, and I know you worked at the Mavericks, but where are you from?" And this played right into my scheme. I looked right at him, and I said, "Chicago, sir, White Sox, not Cubs." Because I knew that Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the White Sox, was instrumental in bringing him into baseball when President Bush was the managing general partner of the Texas Rangers. I knew he was an American League guy. I knew that baseball, in sports, is this way in general. And I'm sure, Mike, you've seen this in your career. Sports is the great connector. And and that's what happened is he immediately smiled, and he looked at the other person in the room, Dan Bartlett, and said, "Oh, we got a baseball fan." And I said, "Yeah, and as a matter of fact, until this moment, aside from the birth of my kids and all that important stuff, the greatest moment of my life was being at Game 2 of the '05 World Series when Scott Podsednik hit the walk-off homer, for the White Sox to win." And we talked baseball is how we got started. So I would encourage you, when you prepare for your interviews, look for that shared experience that you have, something you might have in common. And if you don't have anything in common, make something happen. Like with new business pitches, I pitched with Coin PR in New Jersey. We pitched the Home Shopping Network. I went and bought stuff on the Home Shopping Network so I could talk about the experience. I've done media training for Red Robin restaurants, and I enrolled in the frequent diner club, whatever it's called. And when I was introducing myself, I held up the card, and I held up the Iona Turbis, and it means something to people. It doesn't always land 100%, but it means something. Then they see that you've made that effort. So number one, highlight the shared experience, and then the other thing, and you want to demonstrate immediately that you understand their world, their issues, their opportunities. So, and when I was in your shoes, researching a company meant, where's their headquarters and how many employees and what do they do, or, that kind of stuff. Now it's what opportunities and challenges are you facing? And you want to show up with ideas. I read the story in the Wall Street Journal last week about this. I was talking to some of my buddies, and one idea we came up with was this. And even if it doesn't fit at all, they will be impressed that you thought about helping them navigate an opportunity or challenge, and that you're someone with ideas. Because as much as we talk about technology and apps and software and the new platforms, the ideas and the writing and the creative part that drive those platforms is still, in my view, what matters most. So you want to show up like somebody with ideas. Now, one other thing, there's a tendency for anyone who has, a decent amount of humility, and you don't want to make it about yourself, and you don't want to seem like you're bragging. And so you sort of soft sell, and all of those qualities are good, human characteristics, but you have to give them confidence that you can do this job. You have to let them know, that sometimes you're not talking to the person who's going to be your boss. You're talking to HR. And they're just following a routine script. Everybody gets the same questions. You've got to look for opportunities to make your case that you are the person who can make the boss's job easier. I can handle that for you. I'm telling you, I got the job at age 21 with the Mavericks because I had worked on the stats crew when I went to college at Purdue. And I figured out that the person who was hiring me was really nervous about the stats crew. And I just said, I got it. I can do that. I know how to do it. Don't worry about it. What else are you worried about? Just you be the person who solves their problem, who gives them comfort that you're going to help them be better at their job, and you're going to do the stuff that they don't want to do. And if you can accomplish that, I promise you'll have a good chance of landing the job, because that's what they're looking for. Somebody who's going to be a quick study, low maintenance, be willing to work. And young people have a bad rap right now. You want to work from home all the time. You want to know what's in it for you. You want to know about professional development. You want to know how fast you can become a vice president. Like, all of that can come in time, but you want them to see you as somebody with ideas who's going to work. And that would be the way I would approach it. And if they ask you, what did you do? One thing to think about is to describe a success story at work. Here was a situation. Here's what I was tasked to do. And here was the outcome or the result. Think about, situation, my task, or our department's task. And I know, some of you are coming right out of, school, and maybe you don't have a ton of experience in a professional setting, but think of it, that way. And that might be a good thing. And if they ask you what you're bad at, a friend of mine who's a guidance counselor here at SMU calls it, he says he advises MBA students at SMU on job interviews. And he always tells them to avoid what he calls the universal death blow. And that is, things like, well, I'm really not good at writing, or I'm really uncomfortable with public speaking, or, oh, I'm terrible at this or that. Like, don't give them a reason. In the interest of being honest, don't give them a reason to not hire you. Be careful of that. One of the things to do is identify an issue that you're already working on. You know, I used to have a hard time organizing my time. And as a result, I overcommitted myself, but I have really, I read a book or I took a webinar, and I have really identified that as something I'm working on. Show forward progress, and you will come across better. I can go from North Avenue to the White House. I promise everybody on this call can achieve what they want to achieve, whether it's the White House or, something else. You just don't let people discourage you. You just pursue the dream that you have or the goal that you have. I hate the expression follow your dreams because it's a passive kind of thing. You got to get after it. You have to identify it and get after it. And it isn't always a straight line, but you can achieve it if you stay with it.